The man everyone listened to in your ancestors' tribe was probably not the biggest man in the group. He was not the most aggressive. He was not the one who took the most and shared the least. That man existed too, and the tribe had a way of dealing with him. What made a Stone Age man worth following was something far more specific, far more demanding, and far more interesting than anything the modern world celebrates under the word alpha. This is what the science actually shows. To understand what leadership looked like in the Stone Age, you first have to understand what Stone Age society actually was. For the vast majority of the 300,000 years that modern humans have existed, we lived in small, mobile bands, typically 20 to 50 individuals, extended family groups moving across the landscape following food, water, and shelter through the seasons. No permanent settlements, no accumulated wealth, no walls, no armies, no courts, no prisons. In this world, the mechanisms that enforce hierarchy in modern societies simply did not exist. A leader in a hunter-gatherer band could not imprison anyone, could not withhold wages, could not call security, could not fire someone. The only power a leader had was the power that other people chose to give them, voluntarily, every single day. Anthropologist Christopher Baim spent decades studying this question. He examined the ethnographic records of hundreds of hunter-gatherer societies from around the world: the San of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Aboriginal Australians, the Inuit of the Arctic, the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin, and found a consistent pattern that runs across all of them, regardless of geography, climate, or culture. Hunter-gatherer societies are almost universally egalitarian, not because ancient humans were somehow more noble or more enlightened, but because the group had powerful, actively enforced mechanisms for pulling down anyone who tried to dominate others by force. Baim called this reverse dominance hierarchy. When one individual tried to seize disproportionate power, the rest of the group would respond, first with mockery and ridicule, then with criticism and ostracism, and if that failed, in extreme cases, with collective lethal action. The tyrant did not last long in the Stone Age. So if raw dominance did not work, what did? Here is the first thing that made a man genuinely worth following in a hunter-gatherer band, and it is not what most people guess. Competence. Specific, observable, life-or-death competence. In a world where a wrong decision about which route to take, which animal to hunt, which plant to eat, or where to make camp could kill everyone in the group, the person whose judgment had repeatedly proven correct was worth listening to. Not because anyone told you to listen to them, because ignoring them was dangerous. Anthropologists studying the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last true hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, found that the men most consistently identified as leaders by their own group were not the physically largest or most aggressive. They were the most knowledgeable, the best trackers, the hunters who understood animal behavior so deeply that they could predict where a herd would move 3 days from now, the men who knew the landscape in their bones, where water could be found in the dry season, which plants were edible after which rains, where the dangerous predators denned. This knowledge was not abstract, it was not theoretical, it was demonstrated continuously, in real time, in front of people whose lives depended on getting it right. Leadership in the Stone Age was not claimed, it was observed. A man did not stand up and declare himself a leader. He went out, did something difficult and consequential, and came back with meat. He read the sky correctly, and the rain came when he said it would. He found water in a landscape that looked empty to everyone else. And the group noticed, and the group followed. Patiently, but competence alone was not enough. There was a second quality that the research keeps returning to, one that surprises people when they first encounter it: generosity. In every hunter-gatherer society that anthropologists have studied, the sharing of food is not just a courtesy, it is a foundational social institution. Meat especially, large game that one hunter or one small group could not consume alone, is distributed through the entire band according to complex but deeply understood social rules. And the man who gave more than he took, who distributed meat widely rather than hoarding it, who ensured that the old and the very young and the less successful hunters still ate, that man accumulated something more valuable than food. He accumulated obligation, trust, loyalty. Economist and anthropologist Samuel Bowles has studied the economics of hunter-gatherer sharing and found that it functions as a form of insurance. When you give meat to someone today, you are not just feeding them. You are creating a debt that will be repaid when you are the one who came back empty-handed. In a world with no food storage, no markets, and no money, the most reliable food security strategy was to be someone that the group wanted to keep alive and eating. The generous man was the man the group needed to survive, and the group made sure he survived. But there was a specific quality to this generosity that matters. It was not the generosity of someone buying loyalty. The ethnographic records are consistent on this point. Hunter-gatherers were extraordinarily sensitive to the difference between genuine generosity and performative display. A man who gave conspicuously, who made a show of his sharing, who reminded others of what he had given, that man was viewed with suspicion. His gifts were seen as a form of manipulation, as an attempt to accumulate social debt in a way that smelled too much like domination. The man worth following gave because giving was the right thing to do, and everyone could tell the difference. Here is the third trait, and this one reshapes everything: the ability to manage conflict without escalating it. In a band of 20 to 50 people who cannot leave, who are bound together by kinship, by survival necessity, by the simple fact that alone in the Pleistocene you died, interpersonal conflict was the most dangerous force in daily life. A feud between two families, a dispute over a mate, an accusation of cheating in the distribution of meat. These were not abstract social problems. They were existential threats to the cohesion of the group. The man who could stand between two furious people and bring them back from the edge, without taking sides, without humiliating anyone, without winning and losing, was worth more to that band than the strongest fighter in it. Primatologist Frans de Waal spent decades studying conflict resolution in chimpanzee and human societies and identified what he called the peacemaker role as one of the most consistent features of primate social leadership. The alpha in a chimpanzee group is not simply the most aggressive individual. The most successful alphas are the ones who intervene in conflicts between others and restore stability. Their authority comes not from fear, but from their function as a source of order. In human hunter-gatherer societies, this function was even more critical because, unlike chimpanzees, humans have weapons, and weapons make unresolved conflict lethal. The man who could talk it down, who could find a resolution that allowed both parties to walk away without their dignity destroyed, who could hold the group together when it was pulling itself apart, that was the man the group gathered around when things went wrong. But here is where the picture becomes more complex, because there was a fourth quality, one that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten how to value. Ritual knowledge, spiritual authority, the ability to make the unknown feel navigable. In a world where death came without warning, where the rains failed without explanation, where children died of causes that no one could identify or prevent, the ability to provide a framework for understanding why things happened and what could be done about them was not a minor social function. It was the difference between a group that held together under catastrophic stress and a group that fell apart. The shaman, the elder, the man who knew the stories of where the group had come from, who could interpret the signs in the landscape and the sky, who held the ceremonies that marked the transitions from one season to the next, from boy to man, from life to death. That man carried something that pure physical competence could never provide. He carried meaning. Evolutionary anthropologist Joseph Henrich has argued that the transmission of cultural knowledge, ritual, story, ceremony, belief, was not a luxury in the Stone Age. It was core survival technology. Groups that maintained coherent cultural frameworks, made better collective decisions, cooperated more reliably under stress, and persisted longer than groups without them. The man who held and transmitted that knowledge was indispensable, and indispensable men were not abandoned or displaced. They were protected and followed. Now, here is what the data shows when you put all four traits together. Psychologists Mark Van Vught and Anjana Ahuja, reviewing decades of leadership research across human and non-human primate societies, found that effective leadership in small-scale societies consistently clustered around the same profile. Not the most dominant, not the most aggressive, not the most physically impressive. The most competent in the domain that currently mattered most, the most generous in the distribution of resources, the most skilled at reducing conflict rather than winning it, and the most trusted to navigate the territory between the known and the unknown. These men were not worshipped, they were not obeyed, they were consulted. They were followed when the group collectively agreed that following them made sense. And when they stopped making sense, when their judgment failed, when their generosity dried up, when they began to use their position to take more than they gave, the group stopped following. Quietly, without drama, they simply looked elsewhere. Power in the Stone Age was entirely conditional, entirely earned, and entirely revocable. Here is what that means for you. The traits your nervous system is still scanning for, the ones your instincts use to assess who is worth trusting, who is worth following, who is genuinely powerful versus who is merely performing power. Those assessment systems were built in the Stone Age. They were built to detect competence under pressure, genuine generosity versus strategic display, the capacity to hold a group together rather than fracture it, and the ability to carry meaning and navigate the unknown with something that looks like confidence. Your instincts are extraordinarily good at this, better in many cases than your conscious reasoning. You can tell within minutes of meeting someone whether their confidence is earned or borrowed, whether their generosity comes from abundance or calculation, whether their authority rests on something real or on the performance of something real. You inherited those detection systems from ancestors who could not afford to be wrong about them. The man worth following in the Stone Age was not the loudest man in the group. He was the one the group fell quiet to hear. That has not changed as much as we think.